one more time. I mean, they were talking about cracking down on hate speech online. Like, that free speech is not hate speech. That Tim Walz guy was actually saying that.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
Hate speech. Free speech does not include hate speech. Like, what are you, by whose definition? Yours? A guy who thinks tampons should be in the boys' room?
Joe Rogan and Megyn Kelly did not hold back when they went after Minnesota Governor Tim Walz during a fiery live segment. What started as a conversation about freedom of speech quickly turned into a full-blown exposure of Walz's political missteps, contradictions, and controversial policies. Joe Rogan was especially fired up over Walz's remarks on hate speech and misinformation. Walz suggested that free speech did not include hate speech and that there was no constitutional protection for spreading misinformation. Rogan immediately pushed back, calling it a dangerous distortion of the First Amendment. He was stunned that someone in such a powerful position could hold views that directly clash with the core principles of democracy. Megyn Kelly joined in, shaking her head in disbelief, adding that Walz's comments were not only wrong, but incredibly reckless. Things only got worse from there. Joe Rogan, with his signature sarcasm, described Walz as the kind of guy who wants to put tampons in boys' bathrooms while claiming to care about public safety and education. According to Rogan, Walz governs like a man trying to win a leadership contest without knowing the rules. He brought up a shocking statistic that between 2015 and 2023, 24 babies were born alive after failed abortions in Minnesota. During a time when Walz repealed a law requiring life-saving care, Megyn Kelly nearly lost it, pointing out that this wasn't just bad policy, it was heartless. Both of them agreed that Walz's leadership was a confusing mix of performative empathy, shallow promises, and very little action. Kelly compared him to a character from a badly written crime movie. She said Walz reminded her of someone who pretends to be harmless but is actually dangerous underneath the surface. She even compared him to the villain from The Usual Suspects, someone who fakes a limp and a disability just to fool everyone, only to walk away clean in the end. That, she claimed, is how Walz operates, pretending to be clueless and humble, while pushing radical policies behind the scenes. Rogan went further, calling Walz the human version of brain fog. He mocked Walz's speaking style, saying that listening to him is like watching someone try to explain how a microwave works using only yoga poses. Rogan was brutal, saying Walz governs like a man trying to play SimCity on hard mode with the controller unplugged. He argued that every one of Walz's decisions just leads to more problems, more confusion, and more angry Minnesotans who are embarrassed by their governor. Then they dived into Walz's long history of exaggerating and even lying about his past. Walz once claimed he was present during the Tiananmen Square protests, only to later say he had his dates mixed up. He then said he was in Hong Kong and not in the middle of the protests. Joe Rogan couldn't believe it. He said Walz lied about being in war, lied about coaching a football team, and lied about basic facts. Megyn Kelly chimed in, saying that habitual liars like Walz can't be trusted with real leadership. She noted that people who lie about the small things often lie about the big ones, too. The conversation shifted to Walz's handling of law and order. They described Minneapolis under Walz as a disaster zone, comparing it to a city after a demolition derby. Rogan mocked a press conference where Walz stood in front of cameras looking confused, delivering a speech about healing while the city burned behind him. He described it as a performance by a substitute teacher who walked into the wrong class. Megyn Kelly shook her head, saying that Walz's version of leadership during that time was to mumble vague platitudes and hope no one noticed how bad things really were. Rogan couldn't help but laugh at how Walz handled the pandemic. One day, it was stay home, stay safe, and the next it was go out. We believe in you. Rogan compared it to a man trying to land a plane while reading Yelp reviews for local restaurants. He said Walls was so unprepared and inconsistent that people didn't know whether to trust him or hide from him. The two criticized how businesses were forced to shut down while Walls gave out grants to consultants, asking why people didn't want to work. The answer, they said, was obvious: people were broke and broken. Megyn Kelly focused on education, which she described as one of Walls's biggest failures. She said his school shutdown policies turned students into Zoom zombies. Kids were muting themselves during class, pretending to pay attention, while teachers were stuck juggling online and in-person learning. Kelly said the education system under Walls became a circus where no one knew what they were supposed to be doing, and everyone was just pretending it was fine. Test scores dropped, stress levels rose, and Walls acted like everything was going according to plan. They also took aim at Walls's economic policies, or what Rogan called a series of naps interrupted by meetings. Walls supported giving driver's licenses, free tuition, and free health care to undocumented immigrants. While regular Minnesotans were struggling to make ends meet, Megyn Kelly questioned where all that money was coming from, sarcastically asking if Walls had discovered a magic pot of gold. She reminded viewers that these freebies weren't free, they were paid for by taxpayers. Then came the topic of gender identity and school bathrooms. Walls supported putting tampons in boys' bathrooms, starting from elementary school. Rogan rolled his eyes, saying it was like trying to solve a math problem by throwing glitter on it. He said Walls was more focused on symbolic gestures than real solutions. Megyn Kelly was furious, stating that children should not be used in political experiments. According to her, Walls was trying to take children away from parents who refused to agree to life-altering surgeries. She said it was not just wrong, it was dangerous. They criticized Walls's obsession with wind energy, especially during freezing Minnesota winters. Rogan joked that Walls wanted to make the state colder for equity. They both laughed at how ridiculous that sounded, pointing out how people were freezing while Walls was begging them to invest in wind turbines. If irony were a power source, Kelly said Minnesota would be a nuclear plant by now. He even brought up his transportation projects. Walls wanted more trains, but not ones that actually worked, just the idea of trains. Joe Rogan said it was like a child describing their dream treehouse with no plans to build it. Roads were full of potholes, and cyclists were commuting using nothing but hope. Rogan cracked up, saying Walls's entire infrastructure plan could be summarized as vision without blueprint, and that the only thing holding Minnesota together was duct tape and wishful thinking. Kelly went into detail about Walls's so-called communication skills. She said he talks like a man who swallowed a dictionary but forgot how to form a sentence. His speeches were long, confusing, and empty. She joked that listening to him was like watching someone do interpretive dance with words. Rogan added that Walls could make a recycling announcement sound like a hostage negotiation. They both agreed that his words had no meaning, just buzzwords thrown together to sound intelligent. Education, again, was a sore spot. Kelly said Walls's education policies looked like they came from a Pinterest board. He praised students for learning how to open Chrome tabs while they cried over online math homework. She said kids didn't thrive, they survived, and Walls acted like survival was a success. Rogan slammed Walls's constant need to dodge responsibility. Everything, according to Walls, was someone else's fault. The previous administration, the weather, or Mercury. Being in retrograde, Rogan said he sounded like a high school student who forgot to do his homework and blamed the dog. Whenever someone asked Walls a tough question, he would smile awkwardly, mumble something vague, K, and disappear behind bureaucratic language. They brought up his lies again about being a head coach, being in Tiananmen Square, and even about fixing trucks. Rogan mocked him for using working-class imagery while doing staged videos of him working on his car. He joked that Walls was like a guy trying to look relatable while not knowing how to use a wrench. Kelly added that everything Walls did looked like an ad campaign, not real leadership. The final part of the segment focused on how Walls talks about unity. He always says he wants to bring people together, but everything he does divides them further. Rogan said Walz acts like he's hosting a group therapy session during a fire drill. Megyn Kelly didn't sugarcoat ISG, said Walz couldn't even unify a pack of crayons, let alone a state. His idea of unity, she said, was forcing everyone to agree with him or be labeled as the enemy. Rogan ended the segment by calling Walz the human version of an expired granola bar. He looks fine on the outside, but makes you sick if you consume too much. Minnesotans, he said, are exhausted and looking for relief. Kelly agreed, saying that if Walz's time in office was a movie, it would be a horror comedy terrifying in its consequences, but laughable in its execution. Sure, here's the continuation of your script. Rogan and Kelly then tackled the most bizarre aspect of Walz's political image, its obsession with looking like a man of the people. They mentioned how he constantly appeared in flannel shirts, standing next to pickup trucks, or working on cars in staged videos. Rogan laughed and said it was like watching a Hollywood actor badly play the role of a mechanic. Megyn Kelly wasn't impressed either. She said Walz's attempts to look relatable were so fake they could be turned into a parody commercial. Here's a governor who can't fix policy, but wants you to believe he can fix a carburetor, she quipped. Then they got into Walz's energy failures again. During one of the coldest winters in Minnesota, Walz doubled down on his plan to push unreliable energy sources, forcing citizens to rely on wind and solar when they just needed working heat. Kelly compared it to trying to charge your phone with a potato useless when it matters most. Rogan said it was like Walz was running an experiment where Minnesotans were the lab rats. He added that the state could have avoided the energy mess if Walz had just focused on keeping things simple and reliable. But Walz, they argued, prefers making things complicated so he can blame someone else when they fall apart. The pair also pointed out how Walz seems to live in his own bubble when it comes to major issues like crime, education, and economic decline. He acts like things are improving, even when the numbers say otherwise. Rogan mentioned a time when Walz gave a speech about how proud he was of Minnesota's progress, just days after a spike in crime and a major business closure. Kelly sarcastically said he must be reading headlines from a parallel universe. They both laughed, but the laughter quickly turned to frustration. Rogan said it's one thing to spin the truth, but it's another to ignore reality completely. One topic that triggered both hosts was Walz's relationship with teachers' unions. Rogan said Walz treated the unions like they were royalty, giving them everything they wanted while parents were left in the dark. Kelly called it political bribery disguised as support. She explained that during school closures, many parents begged for answers, but Walz sided with union leaders who wanted to delay in-person learning. The result, they said, was a generation of students who lost valuable time and trust in the system. The conversation turned back to law enforcement. Walz was accused of ghosting police departments at a time when they needed him most, Rogan said. You know it's bad when your governor is hiding from cops like a teenager who crashed the family car. He added that Walz didn't just avoid responsibility, he avoided presence. During the George Floyd riots, for instance, Walz delayed deploying the National Guard, and when he finally did, the damage was already done. Kelly said this moment showed how indecisive and slow Walz was when leadership was needed most. Again, added another jab, saying that Walz's decision-making process looked like someone spinning a wheel labeled maybe and ask again later. Kelly compared him to a substitute gym teacher suddenly asked to lead the country's most important emergency meeting. She said Walz looked constantly overwhelmed, as if every new problem was a surprise to him, even the ones he created himself. As they dug into Walz's healthcare policies, Kelly rolled her eyes. She said his plans for universal access were nothing more than big promises with no actual plan. Rogan noted how hospitals were struggling and nurses were burning out. Yet Walz continued to smile at press conferences and pretend everything was under control. They said the healthcare system under his watch was like a boat with holes in every direction, and Walz was standing there with a garden hose trying to clean the deck. They laughed again, this time over Walz's ridiculous plan to solve Minnesota's housing crisis. Walz proposed another task force and a public listening tour. Rogan burst out laughing. A listening tour? People don't need you to listen. They need a roof over their head. Kelly added that Walz's housing plan was like asking a hungry person to write a poem about food instead of just giving them something to eat. Then came transportation again. Walz's love affair with visionary train projects was brought back up, and this time they shredded it even harder. Rogan said the trains didn't even work, yet the state kept pouring money into them like they were building a time machine. Kelly said the only thing that moved quickly on Minnesota's railways was the budget going off the rails. Meanwhile, roads and bridges continued to crumble, and drivers were left dodging potholes big enough to trap small pets. As they wrapped up, Rogan reminded viewers that this wasn't about partisan politics. It was about competence, or in Walz's case, the lack of it. He said Walz was not just a bad governor, but a warning sign of what happens when someone is elected based on image and empty slogans. Kelly agreed. She said Walz was proof that bad leadership doesn't always come with loud speeches or scandals. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, wearing a flannel shirt and pretending to fix a car. They both emphasized the importance of paying attention to leaders like Walz, who seem harmless but make decisions that affect millions. Rogan said it was time to call out hypocrisy, lies, and weak leadership, no matter which side of the aisle it came from. Kelly added that voters need to stop falling for the relatable guy act and start demanding real accountability. Finally, they circled back to where it all started: free speech. Kelly said that leaders like Walz, who want to control what people can say online, are dangerous. She explained that free speech includes unpopular opinions, hard truths, and even misinformation. Because once the government gets to decide what's allowed, everyone loses, Rogan agreed, saying that the internet is messy, but it's supposed to be messy. That's how ideas grow and people learn. They closed by saying that the biggest problem with Walz isn't just what he says, it's what he believes. That hate speech should be controlled, that leadership is a performance, and that silence is a strategy. Rogan said Tim Walz is the kind of guy who shows up late to a crisis and then blames the calendar. Kelly added, and somehow he still acts surprised every time the state demands answers. Their roast of Tim Walz wasn't just a collection of jokes, it was a detailed takedown of a governor they believe has failed his people in almost every way possible. From education to crime, from healthcare to the economy, from energy to speech rights, Walz, in their eyes, has mismanaged it all. And if this live segment made anything clear, it's that Joe Rogan and Megyn Kelly are done pretending otherwise.